panelists, do you have questions that you would like to address to each other to start us off?
So I have a question for Lateef, or for any of you. When just thinking about postnatal spaces, I've thought a lot about this from the beginning of my career as a midwife, because my mother's story was that she went from India just 9 days after marriage, arranged marriage, to the US at a time when there were no other Indians. There was 100 visas a year allowed for anybody of Indian origin to the US until 1965. So she was like going to a different planet, but she got pregnant right away with me, and when she had her baby, she did not have what would have happened if she was at home. So in South India, you go home to your mother's house. In North India, you go home to your mother-in-law's house for 3 months before and 3 months after. And you do no work in the 3 months before. You're fed and cared for, except you sweep, because in India, even now, the brooms don't have a handle. You have to squat and do it like this, and so it gets you strong and ready for that. So and it's a dusty place, so you do it morning and evening. You sweep, and otherwise you're looked after. And postnatally, they bring you food, they teach you, the family is around to help with the breastfeeding and everything. And then I learned many years later that there are these traditions of postnatal care that are ancient in many cultures. There are rules in the Chinese culture about lying in for 40 days. In the Orthodox Jewish community, there's a special place to go for these postnatal women where they are looked after, fed, there's ritual baths and things like that. So I'm just wondering, what was there already in Nigeria around those traditions, and can our work around postnatal spaces be informed by when we used to do it right?
Very good question. In every culture, there is each culture has their own birth culture, traditions after giving birth. And in some culture, just like you rightly mentioned, the Chinese culture, they call it doing the month. And unfortunately, hospitals are not the places, that support all kind of things like that, because of the policies, the laws, introduced there. And yes, maybe by voicing this thing out, so the only concern I have is that is hospital ready to accommodate all cultures in hospitals? That is the first question. But all of these things, in Nigeria, we have like more than 200 ethnic groups, each just very much something like you have in India. Yeah. So yes, there are a bit of things that happen when you go home after giving birth, that the family have to come together, do all of that. So the belief is that these sort of things are better handled while you're at home rather than in hospital. But what we are trying to say here is that, postnatal care, there should be some kind of a preparation right from the hospital, such that when you go home, you can continue to build upon that smoothly and without any stress. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Now it's open to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to continue with the postnatal care. I'm talking about the experience in Spain, so it's not a global idea, but I would like to talk with you about that. Niels Berman, which is a neuroscientific, told that the environment for the baby is always the same. That's the mother. So mother and baby is one person during the postnatal care. And I wonder about the size of the bed as an architectural intervention in post-care, in postpartum care. So if the mother and baby have to be together, the size of the bed should be bigger, even for the partner or even other children could be all together. So that's a factor of well-being and health at the postpartum. And the other possibility is women with women, mothers with mothers. So maybe what about having some space, some room for mothers to join during that days at the hospital, where they can share their experiences of what's happening to me, blah blah, because mother and mother and mothers have the power of the health when they share their knowledge and their travels. So with these two ideas, the bed of the size of the bed and the spaces for mothers, could we do? Could we study that ingredients as healthcare possibilities in postpartum care? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, let me start with the first question. The first question talks about the size of bed. One of the fundamental things, that happen after giving birth is bonding, family bonding. So you need to, mother and child needs to bond, the very first minute of birth, and then they need to be together, including the partner or the husband. And so one of the things that came out of my own PhD is that there's a need for family, which they call, family-centered space that accommodates, a family bed, a space for partner. The only thing is that, for an infant, there's an amount of time that they need to, continue to be in the hands of the mother, even though there may be a provision, for a larger bed to accommodate the infant and the mother. So yes, I think the space is what is important here. When you get the space right, and when you get the space right, rather than hospital space and the bed that you have in the hospital, it can actually accommodate both mother and baby, as well as the partners, including the family of the mother. So yes, I know we have different sizes already for beds, and what I will not go into that. So there is standard for depending on how many people are to share to be in that room. So space is what is of the essence here. That's the first question. The second question talks about remind me please. Yeah, yes. So that is it. So we're talking about communal space. A communal space allows for women to share their idea. So, for instance, we do know that first-time mothers, they need information, because they don't have the experience of, birth the first time. So, when they put them together, when there's a space for that, the only thing is I wonder whether that could happen in hospital. But with sort of things that we are talking about here, that could be encouraged. So there's a need to have that communal space whereby women can come together and share knowledge for education, how to breastfeed, how to nurture the infants. When a baby is in need of something, the next mother that is there can quickly talk to the mother there and say, okay, this is how we can do it. And so all of these things can happen, if we have that space. Right now, I don't know if many hospitals, have that. But in New Zealand, after I finished my PhD, the midwives there, the head of the midwife units here, requested for the results, and then they began to implement some of those things there. In terms of communal space, which is not going to take much, from the hospital managers, to have a place whereby mother could gather together. Even sharing of food, food is an important element for recovery during the postnatal phase. Thank you.
I will add to that and say that I think it's not just mothers, but it's grandmothers, to the degree we've lost a lot of cultural knowledge about, so sometimes the grandmothers now are more afraid or as afraid as the birthing person. But in BC, where I live now, there is one unit, and it's actually the unit that cares for people with substance use history. And they're often very young, and many of them are Indigenous. And they have a space where elders can come and do ceremony with them and do healing ceremony and teachings. And so there are, pockets of places where you can find like that you can have a special space for other mothers. In the room itself, if you don't have a nearby mother, but you have a postpartum doula, or you have somebody else who can sleep, or even just the partner can sleep. I think though in designing you have to think about the institutional anxiety. They will tell them they shouldn't have the baby in bed with them. They will say the baby could fall out, you could lay over the baby. There's all this misinformation about what the science says. But regardless, we can respond, like they can have railings, or we can figure out a way to make those spaces safer, even if they're larger, or somehow show that there won't be, they're firm beds, there's no crack, they're not going to. I think in order to be pragmatic, to implement it, you have to also think about what the institutional anxieties are.
I'm super excited about the topic of postnatal care. I'll be talking a little bit later about my experiences researching and working in Botswana, which, the photos that you shared, I think, were really similar, your health facilities that you have there. And I was going to say, something that's kind of baked in, for better or for worse, in some cases, to the postnatal setup in many of these public facilities in sub-Saharan Africa are open wards. So they're kind of by default, they have this shared space, communal space. And I think, many women I've spoken to actually really liked that experience of having new mothers around them. Everybody, you have some mothers that it's not their first time, so they can share knowledge. They can even, watch each other's babies when they have to go to the restroom or go meet a visitor. And I think there's a lot of conversation that happens in those spaces. And I think that's one of these lessons that we can bring back to settings in North America. We've moved to this private room model, which is great for privacy and autonomy and confidentiality, but you lose that community aspect. And I think one thing I'm really excited about is the idea of even after you've left the hospital, that postnatal period is a high risk time for mothers, and it can also be super isolating. I know that from my own experience, in our culture, especially if you're a first-time mother. And I'd like to see there be more postnatal spaces for new mothers that wouldn't be, boarding facilities, but would be places where you can have some of that community. And maybe there's also some, clinical support as well to monitor symptoms, and that people can go to ask for help if they need it. So that's an exciting area to me.
Any responses to Deb's comments?
I could say a little something. One thing I would like to see is not such a segregation between this is the antenatal, this is the birth, this is the postnatal. you know, if we're going to take down all the walls of everything that we think we know and rebuild something, I think that's one of the things that we could think about anyway. And certainly, you know, birth centres do that quite well. And the family space is often there in the birth centres. But the postnatal care, we know, is direly terrible all over the world. It's like the baby comes out, and this is another, I hate to keep repeating it, but it's another sort of effect of medicalisation, which is, you know, we're just going to focus on the growing fetus, and then the baby's going to be born, and then whoop, everyone's alive, off you go, and we're not going to worry about it anymore. And we did some research. I did some research with some colleagues in Ireland, and we asked women and people what their experiences of motherhood was, first-time mothers, and the postnatal care really came out very, very strongly as nobody wanted to know about me after I'd had the baby. I mean, the doctors didn't care, the midwives, you know, cared a bit more, but still not very much, and I was just left in complete isolation. And as a result of some of that work, they're now setting up sort of postnatal hubs all over, I think 6 in Dublin or something, just so that there's somewhere to go and someone to ask. And this is the thing about peer learning, is the sharing with each other. And I think we have to get a balance between the shove everyone in a room and call it communal peer learning, and it's actually terrible, like, you know, some of your survey results, and intentional communal spaces where people can opt in, because I think that's the difference. And, you know, thinking about birth space and going back to Michelle O'Donnell and the singing they used to do at Pithaviers, and someone was telling me the other day, they read a study, I can't tell you what it was because I haven't read it myself, but it was about singing during pregnancy and outcomes. Have you seen that one? And of course the outcomes were better in the group that sang together in pregnancy. I mean, it's just astounding. But it's that shared...
Even during labor, if you have not just music, but I looked after an opera student at UBC once, and she was having a tough time when she got into active labor, and I was trying to help her breathe, and I realized that she knew how to breathe because she was a singer. So she was in the shower, and I encouraged her to sing, and she just sang all for hours through. She just suddenly remembered that she knew how to do this and sang her baby out. It was incredible. So it definitely, I think you're right that there's got to be something to that.
Wonderful. We have 2 questions I see in 10 minutes, so that should work out just.
Thank you. My question goes a bit when I see the images from Nigeria, the newly renovated, beautiful, hopefully new, with good numbers and everything, and it just hurts inside me. I think there is a huge difference between a building and a piece of architecture, and in a way we also here need to address that. So in a way I would like you to all of you to think of how this idea of humanization can be a strategy for building spaces also in Nigeria, not only as a privileged country with people with that, private donors and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess that was, what is the strategy to humanize birth, not only as a fancy building, but as something you feel?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that observation. It's something that worries, someone like me. Okay, when you see such thing being done, and then you find out that there is little or no consultations before those people in the authority, embark on such projects. Well, I would say that in terms of, because from the beginning, I was, I am somebody, when I was a child, I go in, in and out of hospitals. And so I was like, oh, when I grow up, I would like to do something, that, something regarding health care, buildings, that can give, some sort of, wellness, well-being, you understand? And then, when I was doing my PhD, I think that was, what formed, my, what was my motivation, in terms of doing buildings, that promote wellness. Humanized architecture, not just for hospitals, but for other buildings as well. And so, yes, the quality of the building that I showed there, they were not too encouraging, but there's a way, just like in my presentation, I mentioned the Nigerian Institute of Architects. Okay, so maybe the focus on the, the large, the big picture, but this time around, with someone like myself, talking to these people, I believe there is going to be a change, in terms of what we see for buildings, that promote wellness and, humanized environment generally. So, yes, there is an opportunity to improve on things that we've seen, and then we are going to see that we work on towards that.
I have a different suggestion. I just came back from the International Normal Labor and Birth Conference in the UK, which happens every year. It's fantastic, and you should all go. They're real researchers who are in this space about how to understand the physiology and what supports it. And in that setting, there was a presentation by a midwife who co-led with Ugandan midwives the co-creation of a birth center, a community center. And there's been a lot of focus in the Global South on facility birth. In India, they pay people to go into facilities, and they think that's going to solve it, but there are not enough providers there, and it's actually access to skilled providers that makes a difference in maternal mortality and neonatal mortality. It's not the building, with respect to all of you, but there, we came from in India. They came from a tradition of the birth never went to the hospital. That's where you went. And even in North America, that was true. You went to the hospital if you were sick, and birth was not considered an illness. And you went to the maternity center, where they had some, eventually they had things like monitors or things, but it was well people, smaller units, right? And those are cheaper to build, even for governments, and you put them close. It's like what we know of as community health centers. You put them closer to the setting if they, in their own homes. As you've seen, home is where people want to be. So, and even a home-like place is not home, right? Just to remind you. But when home is not, when they live in a one-room place with all the in-laws and the parents and the cousins, and it's not a place that they would be well served, you can have something in the village that is staffed by midwives. So in South India, there's 7 of these small birthing units that feed into a tertiary care center, and they have dedicated transport systems, and they're all midwife-led at those centers, so they're closer. And if you all could, concentrate on building those smaller units that have these physiologic spaces and are culturally congruent, and have enough of where you can do remote. These days, they can call the tertiary care center and on their phone get guidance even when they're handling an emergency, right? So that's possible if the systems are set up in those smaller centers for communication and for mentorship. And it may be more financially, sustainable. You just have to, we have to do a transdisciplinary thing where the scientists of physiology of birth get together with the space designers and the health economists and say, here's how we've tried the facility of birth, it's not working, it's not reducing it, how can we make it more sustainable this way?
I just want to also plug the International Labour and Birth Conference for any interdisciplinary stuff. That's where I met you, Doreen, and yeah, just keep it on your radar because it's not just a midwifery conference. Think about it, and it's where some of these conversations happen.
The next one's in Portugal.
Yeah.
It's your turn.
Oh, I actually think maybe Saraswathi answered it because I was just going to offer, as a midwife and a systems thinker, that same kind of challenge is kind of about designing the system so that we don't necessarily need the postnatal ward, right? And so how can you design places for birth that cater to that 90% that's going to be low risk, healthy, ready to go home, rather than normalizing keeping people in the institution. So thank you for addressing that.
And we do have a few more minutes, so if somebody's, yes, Marilyn.
I just have one question to ask you. If, for instance, in Australia, less than 50% of women are having a a vaginal birth, all the rest are having operative births of one form or another, and it's around about 30 or 35% are having caesarean sections. So postnatal units are going to have to cater for a growing number of post-surgical, post-operative women. What do you think needs to happen next?
Well, a few things, but actually just on that, a midwife friend of mine posted on some social media site the other day, in a shift, postnatal shift, 18, whatever, 80% of them had, 80% of the people in that postnatal ward had had a caesarean. 80%. So, yeah, I mean, I just think we have to dismantle the whole thing. That's what I think we have to do. But step by step, yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. What I think we don't want to do is start trying to fix these minute little kind of, immediate problems, like how is a midwife going to cope with an 80% caesarean section postnatal care situation and address the root. We have to go way kind of upstream, I guess, and think about what's getting us to that point. And I think a lot of what we focus on is not doing that, is trying to work with what we have and trying to solve those problems, which really just helps everything stay the same and get worse. So, yeah, short answer is I don't know, but
I agree with you that we're always reactive. Okay, we have an 80% in India, 80% in Brazil, 80%, and that's the new normal. So how are we going to have step stools for them to get off the bed and things in the rooms to help the people who have had a C-section to support their abdomens? And that's all important. I'm a midwife. I look after these people. I mean, it's super important. But we're focusing again on that, what should be 10% and has now become 80%, and we're normalizing it. And so if instead we say, we shine a light on the problem that it's actually more costly to care for these people, it's setting up more poor outcomes in the future. And if we invest instead on these ways of, being more patient, having people have, those environments that prevent that, money speaks. So you can then talk about the cost effectiveness of physiologic birth and physiologic care. And then you do have to speak to the audience, but there is a way to reframe it, I think, rather than saying, they won't, I'm a blow up your system. I grew up as a good Indian girl, held as child, but over time I've become more like that, right? So I'm not saying that's what I wouldn't like. But how will we get there, I think, is probably being wiser about our marketing.
It's all very simple, isn't it? I mean, there's so many threads coming through, so much of the work, and being able to disseminate this to just speak with each other and hear each other. The solutions are already all right in front of us. We're just remembering from when there was not so much cesarean, like way back when it was, it was an anomaly, and yet we just keep getting in the way of each other. And so there's more. There's always more to unpack and to discover and work towards, but creating, as you're saying, marketable, just this is attainable. Let's come together and talk about it and make it something that isn't over there with the experts. We had one last, there's a couple, I see they're just setting up the lunch, so I just want to time that because we've been focusing and focusing and focusing for a long time, which is, thank you.
So I have been a consumer birther and a family doctor working with childbirth, and through a very long career, I think a major problem is that women are terrified of birth, that our culture, all our stories are horrific. The movies, women are screaming. So I used Ida Mae Gaskin, spiritual midwifery, a lot, because the first half of the book is science, showing that they have excellent results, and the second half of the book is birth stories, and they are marvelous, and that's what women need. Women are much less likely to give up their power to obstetricians and machines if they feel confident and they believe that they can do this.
I also love that book. It's a fabulous book. I completely agree.
Ina May Gaskin, Gaskin, just in case that's a new name.
I think there was another question there,
yes, she
Davis,
was.
the youngster down the front.
It wasn't quite a question, it was just a comment on almost like built in these hubs. So in terms of like my perspective, I'm a nurse, and most of my career I've flown and worked with Indigenous communities in remote areas, so it's only plane accessible. And I think about how we communicate when there is a labor in person that comes in, because we're not necessarily set up and designed to have midwives in the community, and there's a big movement right now in Canada to bring birthing back to communities. And like you were mentioning about, we have something called like an OTN setup where we can just plug a TV screen right into the wall, and we can have a clinician right there to help guide us through, and someone that's come in preterm labor. And the other thing that we had, even before we had the technology, was who is in the room. And I think about, like, I've also worked critical care emerge, and we've seen a transition from you're in the middle of a code. We didn't want family to come in, especially in the trauma room. Now we bring all the family in to see. There's a lot that happens with closure when there is, especially an event that we're not hoping for and anticipating. I think about the clock that we have behind, the birth, the emergency case. So we're documenting. And up north, I remember my first birth, did not know what to do. We had elders coming in to help us, because it was just like, you guys know better than me. And it was a beautiful moment. We had everyone that needed to be there. And so I think there's a lot of a cultural shift that needs to happen with practitioners, especially with nurses, because I think we don't feel competent, especially those that are in the community that have to deal with it. And so it's also taken away the fear, not just from pregnant people that might be, or birthing individuals that are scared and they're seeing images of pain, but also from normalizing birth for nurses and what we're learning in school. But yeah.
I was asked
I was asked to write an article once, some years ago, for the American College of Nurse Midwives Journal about home birth and screening for home birth, and it was supposed to be a continuing education issue. So I wrote about it, and when the editors, they said, "But this is just normal midwifery," and I said, "Yeah, it's not some specialized skill to attend someone at home. If you can't attend them at home, that's what we do, right?" So then I had said, in the situation of prolonged rupture of membranes or VBAC, and I can't remember, there were a few, like 3 or 4 things, and they wanted me to say, well, these people should really go into the hospital. And so I wrote back and I said, well, you can do an informed choice discussion with these people, and you can say, what is it that we can do in the hospital that we can't do at home? And it was that closing the theory-practice gap, right? Reminding people what they already know. But the other thing I wanted to say is that communities often know what to do. And I have seen at home birth, a baby basically being called back from the other world by the parents or the grandparents in a way that, I had all the bells and whistles. I even had the EMTs and an OB who would come to this house, and, we were doing NRP in the way, and it was the voice, when they heard, the baby heard the voices, that the baby just sort of came around. It was absolutely, there was no other way to explain it. So I think we're talking, it's almost like we're going back. Now they're talking about bedside resuscitation and how you should involve the family, and we have to go back to listening to community knowledge and sort of marrying the two.
Beautiful closure before our lunch break. We can keep talking at the tables.